LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 1st edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Is it August already? Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. You can see my main topic for the video this evening is Joe Biden, Joe Manchin make a big deal on climate change and drug prices? Question mark, of course, because none of these deals are done until they actually pass the House and especially the Senate. You know, we still don't know what Kyrsten Sinema's going to do, but that was, I've been covering it started off as Build Back Better, Biden's big, after the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure deal that was supposed to be his signature plan to invest in America's future, to, give people paid child care and family leave and all sorts of stuff that didn't end up in the slimmed down version of the bill, which is really just about some investments to fight climate change and extensions of the American Health Care Act subsidies and a ability for the government to negotiate prices with the prescription drug industry so that Americans can get lower prices on prescription drugs. And then to pay for it all, there is a minimum corporate tax of like 15% on corporations that make over $1 billion in income, because there are all these big corporations that don't pay any taxes. And then there's this like end to the carried interest loophole where people who run hedge funds take their income as capital gains, so they only pay 15% instead of like the 30 whatever percent they would pay if it was income tax. And so that's the big deal, and I will be talking about that extensively with the news summaries and the newsmaker clips. Joe Manchin, one of the architects of this deal, I will have multiple clips from him. I will have Republican Pat Toomey and Republican Bill Cassidy trying to explain why it's a bad deal. But before I get to the news summaries and Joe Manchin and those Republicans, I do want to give you, my political comedy clip. Oh, thank you, Matthew, for that super chat contribution. I appreciate that. I always appreciate financial support for my efforts here. And but for my political comedy this week, I'm going to show you an actual comedian. Often I try to show jokes just from the news shows, but this week Jon Stewart, formerly of The Daily Show, was on multiple Sunday shows talking about the PACT Act, which is this legislation to get veterans who've been harmed by toxic chemical exposure paid health care through the Veterans Administration. It's mostly about these burn pits for the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, but it actually goes all the way back to Agent Orange in Vietnam. And Jon Stewart and these veterans had gotten this whole thing like worked out, and then because of this Manchin deal, this Manchin-Schumer deal, or what I'm calling the Joe Biden, Joe Manchin deal on climate change and drug prices, but I kind of already described what it actually is to you. Well, because Republicans had agreed to this bipartisan CHIPS deal about giving subsidies to companies to make silicone chips here in the United States rather than in China, so that we, for national security reasons. Well, Republicans signed on to that bill because they thought reconciliation was dead. Reconciliation is this weird Senate process where only the Democrats plus Vice President Kamala Harris's vote can pass legislation if it has to do with the budget, which this climate change and drug prices bill actually does have to do with the budget. So Republicans thought it was dead, and reconciliation was dead, so they agreed to this CHIPS deal, and then Manchin resurrected it right after that. And actually, the Democrats played the Republicans. Mitch McConnell got played by this deal, and that's why they threw this tantrum that was, we're going to punish veterans who've been harmed by toxic chemicals. That's how we're going. That's the tantrum Republicans threw. And anyway, that's kind of my political comedy clip. There are a couple jokes from Jon Stewart in here, so that's, really the comedic part of this is just the way Republicans threw this spiteful tantrum after they got played by Democrats. For once, Mitch McConnell got played by Chuck Schumer, and so they threw this tantrum harming veterans that Jon Stewart talked about. And he makes a couple jokes here that I won't spoil for you, but I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Welcome back. 1 month ago, 84 senators voted for a bill to aid veterans who were exposed to toxins like Agent Orange or in burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this past week, 25 Republicans who had voted yes on that bill switched their votes and blocked the bill from passage. Why? Republicans claim the issue is how the bill is being funded.
It's a budgetary gimmick that has the intent of making it possible to have a huge explosion in unrelated spending. This is not what this bill was about. We can fix it. We can do it immediately.
But Democrats suggest another reason, that Republicans were simply retaliating over the surprise announcement of the Manchin-Schumer deal on climate and health care. And among those most outraged by the switch was comedian and veterans advocate Jon Stewart. And Jon Stewart, who hosts The Problem with Jon Stewart on Apple TV, joins me now. Mr. Stewart, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thanks very much, Chuck. Appreciate it.
Look, let me start. You were so blindsided by this. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you were organizing essentially a thank you press conference. This is what we needed to explain why this bill was so important. And all of a sudden this happened. Walk me through that shock and tell me whether you feel any better about this bill being passed today.
Well, it was devastating. The bill passed the House in March. 256 to 174, right? Got sent to the Senate. There were some changes that needed to be made. There were some legitimate concerns about implementation, how the VA could handle the new influx of patients, the specialized care they need. So the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee went to work on the bill, and they improved it. They cut about $40 billion of spending out of it. They made it more accountable. They made it more direct. Then it went to the Senate floor, passed out of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee unanimously. Senators Tester and Moran, Democrat and Republican, put it all together. It came out unanimously, and in June, it went to the floor of the Senate, and it passed 84 to 14, which in this Senate, you can't get this Senate to pass the ice cream is delicious law, 84 to 14. It was a landslide. There was a technical issue in it, so it had to go back to the House. One sentence. So nothing was added, no gimmick was put in, nothing was changed. When it came back to the Senate to what we thought was just a procedural vote, then they shot it down. But nothing had changed in the bill from the one that they had passed 84 to 14 in June. And so none of us understood it. And I asked Senator Cruz why. What had been inserted into the bill? What gimmick, what budgetary flip had they inserted in there that caused you to change your vote from yes on June 16th to no in July? And do you know what he said, Chuck?
Well, go ahead. I was going to play his clip for you, but you beat me to it, so tell me.
He didn't say anything.
Right.
He can't point to anything specific that was changed. They've all just got this mumbo jumbo about a budgetary gimmick, but nothing changed. Yeah. This isn't my opinion. Yeah. It's on Congress.gov. The text of the bill they voted for June 14th is the same bill.
Well, let me get you to react to him. Here is what Ted Cruz said, directing it to you.
As the Democrats played a budgetary trick, which is they took $400 billion in discretionary spending and they shifted it to mandatory. The reason they did that is they want to spend $400 billion more discretionary funds on completely unrelated matters. And so it's just part of the out-of-control spending from the left. And
before I get you to respond, I mean, the unrelated matters is just not true. This money, even when you create the bigger pool, still only can be spent on veterans. But anyway, go ahead.
That's correct.
Yes.
Well, the difference between mandatory and discretionary is that's just a word salad that he's spewing into his coffee cup on his way to God knows where. As veterans sit in Washington, D.C. in the sweltering heat, demanding that they pass this legislation that they've been fighting for 15 years. Look, anybody can say anything. You know, we could say Elvis Presley is still alive, but at some point we all have to live in reality. And what he is saying is just factually incorrect. Yeah. The bill that Ted Cruz voted yes on had the exact same funding provisions as the bill he voted no on. It's the exact same bill. None of this makes any sense.
Have you spoken?
And the trick that was, yeah.
Yeah, have you spoken to any other of the Republicans?
So you have Jon Stewart. I mean, he has a couple comedic lines in there. The whole, like, 84 votes for this bill before, and then you can't get 84 votes for the Ice Cream is Delicious Act, though I have some lactose intolerance, so I don't know if I would vote for that bill. And then the whole, like, you can say Elvis is alive. That was kind of another joke. Well, I don't know. Were Jon Stewart's jokes as good as they were back when he had, like, a great stable full of writers on The Daily Show? Some people say that his new show, The Problem with Jon Stewart, isn't as good because he doesn't have his writers aren't as good. But actually, in this case, I mean, he has a really good issue, and he's gotten a lot of coverage. He's even been on Fox News, and I think he may actually have shamed the Republicans. You know, 84 of them voted for almost the exact same bill, as he pointed out. I mean, he got in a fight with Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey, who was one of the few senators who actually voted against this bill the first time. But the whole thing is just ridiculous, and I think within a day or two you're going to see Republicans back off on this issue where they're losing badly politically. But it was, like I said, it was really a tantrum because they got played by Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer and President Joe Biden, where everybody thought reconciliation was dead, Build Back Better was dead, and so they agreed to another bipartisan bill after the bipartisan infrastructure deal that got decoupled from Build Back Better, if you remember my coverage months ago. Well, now they passed this CHIPS bill to create more domestic production of silicone chips, and Republicans signed on to that, and then hours later Joe Manchin came out and said, oh, well, maybe we can pass something with just Democratic votes to, you know, regarding the budget, this reconciliation package. And now I'm going to show you the 5 different news summaries that covered this, and they all did a pretty good job, except for Fox News Sunday, of course, because, as we all know, Fox News is not really a news channel. It's a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party. If you read this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you will know that Roger Ailes, before he died, created Fox News as a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, so we shouldn't be surprised. But before I get to the Fox News Sunday news summary, which is the second longest of the 5 news summaries, I'm going to start with the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, which, I mean, it covered the news for, I don't know, for some reason it did this weird focus on foreign policy, and they had Ian Pannell, their reporter in Ukraine, talking about foreign policy. He talks about Nancy Pelosi's possible visit to Taiwan and how that's blowing up possible foreign policy with China. And then he talks about the release of Brittany Griner, the NBA player arrested in Russia, and how that might affect U.S.-Russian relations. But he's reporting from Ukraine and says almost nothing about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. You'll hear Jonathan Karl, the host, actually mentions the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, briefly in this news summary, but nothing about what's going on with that, which is kind of weird. That's my one comment on what is otherwise a pretty good news summary, except for its weird focus on foreign policy from Ian Pannell in Ukraine. But anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the longest news summary from ABC together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. With just 100 days until the midterms, President Biden is dealing with something he hasn't seen in a while. Good news. A week of victories after months of setbacks. The president had a spring in his step after emerging from COVID, and Congress passed a long-debated bill to boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing. And then a deal no one saw coming. A reversal from Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat who had stood in the way of so much of the president's agenda, announcing his support for key components of Biden's Build Back Better plan. Is it the beginning of a comeback or a mirage? The Manchin deal still needs to pass, and some Democrats are complaining loudly that the deal was struck in secret. And as for that COVID recovery, President Biden tested positive again yesterday, a rebound case, although his doctor says he is feeling fine. We're going to talk to Senator Manchin in a moment, but we begin this morning with major stories about America's two most powerful rivals, China and Russia. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is en route to Asia, rattling China over a possible trip to Taiwan, which would be the first by a Speaker of the House in a quarter century. Meanwhile, a highly unusual negotiation is playing out in public over two Americans detained by Moscow. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell has been tracking the latest and joins us now from Ukraine. Ian, the Chinese are warning of major consequences if Pelosi actually goes to Taiwan, and Biden seems to agree.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's not just China who thinks this is inflammatory if it goes ahead. And I think we have to say her team have released her itinerary, which doesn't mention visiting Taiwan, although that still doesn't mean that she couldn't go because, of course, given the sensitivities, it likely wouldn't be pre-announced. Biden's saying even the U.S. military thinks it is, quote, not a good idea, and privately she's been urged against it. You know, this would be the highest level visit to the island since Gingrich went in '97. But today, China is a much more powerful country than 25 years ago. Its posture towards Taiwan is more strident, and Xi Jinping is far more prone to take risks than his predecessors. I think Beijing thinks a visit would embolden those pro-independence forces in Taiwan. They're calling this foreign interference, a violation of the One China principle. We've heard those things before, but he's also warning, as you say, of forceful measures, including military action, if she does go. Chinese media are even saying that Xi threatening America in that phone conversation with President Biden this week, saying, quote, playing with fire, you'll only burn yourself. There's a lot of rhetoric, and if she goes, China will likely respond with some show of force, but of course avoiding a direct conflict with America, but it would be highly dangerous. And here's the rub, finally. There are also many who believe now if she doesn't go, it's going to be seen as capitulation to Chinese pressure. John?
Let's turn to this talk of a possible prisoner swap to free Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. This has led to the first high-level talks between Russia and the United States since the invasion of Ukraine. What's your sense, Ian? Are the Russians negotiating in good faith here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the Biden administration is clearly feeling and succumbing to that public pressure to get Griner and Paul Whelan out. But of course, it's frustrated by Russia's stalling tactics. And I think that appears to explain the leak about convicted arms smuggler Victor Bout as a potential swap. It's a deal the Russians appear for now not to be taking. And this leak, I think, seems to be aimed more at easing U.S. public opinion than actually pressuring Moscow. The White House is also appearing on the back foot now, having to shoot down this idea, again floated by Russian officials, to release his character Vadim Krasikov. He's a convicted assassin currently in jail in Germany. It's not a realistic proposal. You ask, is Russia negotiating in good faith? I don't think so. And it certainly doesn't appear to be in any rush, I think, to release either Griner or Whelan. John.
All right, Ian Pannell, thank you. We turn now to President Biden's domestic agenda. After 18 months of tense negotiations, backroom dealing, and more than a little name-calling, Joe Manchin, the most conservative Democrat in the Senate from deep red West Virginia, and often a thorn in the side of his party, agreed to a far-reaching deal that would represent the most ambitious plan to combat climate change that the U.S. has ever undertaken. That is, if it becomes law. With Republicans uniformly opposed, Democrats will need to stay totally united in the coming weeks to pass the bill, and that is far from guaranteed. Joining us now is the architect of the bill, Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Manchin.
And like I said, I will have clips of Senator Joe Manchin, but like I also said before I showed the clip, there was kind of a weird focus on the U.S. foreign policy regarding Russia and China and the Brittany Griner thing for Russia, especially since Ian Pannell was in Ukraine and didn't even report on what's going on with the war in Ukraine, and then Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan and all that. But one thing I have to say is, even though they had that weird focus, they did still tell you what was in the big deal that is my main topic this week. Here's like that screenshot from ABC. So they told you the main ingredients of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 according to Senate Democrats, and that's what they're saying is going to be in the deal. And those are things, the itemized list of things in the deal, that never really showed up on Fox News Sunday yesterday because, of course, as I pointed out, and as Gabriel Sherman pointed out in the book The Loudest Voice in the Room, Fox News is not a news channel, and I spent many years creating Fox News bias videos proving the same thing. I have hundreds of videos on my Fox News bias playlist. You can see it youtube.com/LiberalViewer. It's one of my playlists on my channel if you're really interested. But here you can see Fox News Sunday. They don't give you the ingredients of the plan that you saw on ABC over here. Instead, they have this weird focus on Biden's case of COVID rebound, which you'll see reported on multiple news channels, but Fox News decides they're going to spend all their time on it and not tell you what's in this big deal that Joe Biden, Joe Manchin, and Chuck Schumer just worked out. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. After more than a year of stops and starts, Senate Democrats are close to a deal to push through at least a slimmed-down version of President Biden's signature social spending package. The surprise deal struck between Senator Chuck Schumer and key holdout Senator Joe Manchin includes billions to fight climate change and taxes to subsidize health care and lower the cost of prescription drugs. But with Republicans solidly opposed, passage is far from certain. Democrats need every senator in their majority to be on board. The clock is ticking down towards August recess, and midterm elections are now just 100 days away. In a moment, we'll speak with the man in the middle of the negotiations, West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. But first, to Griff Jenkins, live at the White House, where the president is back in isolation after experiencing a rebound from COVID. Griff.
Good morning, Brett. The president is here at the White House this morning after testing positive again yesterday, forcing him to cancel plans to be in Wilmington today and sidelining his return to the road to sell his agenda, scrapping a trip to Michigan on Tuesday. His doctor, Kevin O'Connor, says in a letter, quote, "The president has experienced no re-emergence of symptoms and continues to feel quite well." The president, who first tested positive on July 21st, underwent Paxlovid treatment, then tested negative on Wednesday. He downplayed the rebound case in a video.
Tested positive this morning. Going to be working from home for the next couple of days. And feeling fine. Everything's good. But Command and I got a little work to do.
Now, new questions are being raised over how strictly he adhered to CDC guidelines, seen unmasked in several public appearances this week, but photographed wearing a mask as he signed a disaster declaration yesterday. White House aides say he has been careful not to expose anyone as contact tracing is yet again underway. The rebound case also a setback for the president as he tries to show he's fit and healthy. Brett?
Griff Jenkins, live from the White House. Griff, thank you. Joining us now, Democratic.
So yeah, I'll show some Fox News bias in the questioning of Joe Manchin a little bit later, but I think you kind of saw it there in the news summary, like I said before I showed it, that Biden's social spending plan, and they don't really give the details. They spend most of their time talking about the details of his COVID rebound case, but not what's really in the legislation. You don't get to see anything like what they showed over on ABC, and even in the shorter news summary on CBS News' Face the Nation, John Dickerson is in this week for Margaret Brennan. They talk about Biden's COVID rebound case, but they also tell you what's in the deal that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret is off this week. We've got a lot to get to today, and we begin with the news that President Biden is experiencing a rebound case of COVID, most likely due to his taking the drug Paxlovid. He has returned to isolation, but took to Twitter yesterday.
Hey folks, Joe Biden here. Tested positive this morning. Going to be working from home for the next couple of days. And I'm feeling fine. Everything's good.
Although the president said that the rebound cases do happen with a small minority of folks, the actual number is difficult to track, and estimates vary on just how many Paxlovid users are affected. Another Democrat who is recovering from COVID is West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. He's been negotiating with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Inflation Reduction Act, and the final agreement was made in a Zoom call. Democrats say the bill would reduce the deficit by $300 billion. Revenue would come from a minimum corporate tax rate, expanded IRS tax enforcement, and by tightening a so-called carried interest loophole that benefits some investment managers. The bill would also make the largest investment in fighting climate change in U.S. history. Nearly $370 billion will go to new tax credits for renewable forms of electricity, electric vehicles, and grants to automakers to increase efficiency. On health care, the bill would keep the Affordable Care Act's premiums from increasing and cap out-of-pocket prescription drug costs for Medicare recipients at $2,000 per year. Medicare will also be able to directly negotiate prices with drug companies, reducing costs. We go now to West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin.
And yeah, there you see CBS News Face the Nation. They had a shorter news summary than Fox News Sunday, but they had a lot more details about what's in the deal that Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer worked out that looks like it's going to get 50 votes plus one in the Senate, and Joe Biden's going to have another legislative success in addition to the CHIPS bill. And why none of those details made it into Fox News Sunday, you can let me know what you think in the comment section. But CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper also, they talked about Biden's COVID rebound case, but also gave details of what is in the deal that Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer worked out, that the reconciliation case. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this even shorter news summary from CNN together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if political tides may be turning. President Biden is back in isolation this morning after testing positive with a rebound case of COVID after being treated with Paxlovid, though his doctor says he no longer has any symptoms. This time, Biden does have some good news to mull over. First, the bipartisan passage of a bill to boost competition with China on the manufacturing of semiconductors. And second, a sudden possible deal in Congress on a massive plan to begin to tackle the climate crisis, high drug prices, and address big companies that avoid taxes. The breakthrough, after more than a year of negotiations between Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, took almost everyone in Washington by surprise. The plan would invest $369 billion into energy and the climate, allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, extend Obamacare subsidies, and aim to close a loophole for tax-dodging corporations that report more than $1 billion in profit. But with 100 days until the midterms, will these successes come in time for Democrats to sway any voters before November? And will Democrats on the Hill be able to get the bill to President Biden's desk? Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia joins us now to discuss. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
So even that brief news summary from CNN's State of the Union had some details about the deal. The final news summary is the shortest one this week from NBC News Meet the Press. You know, usually Chuck Todd has the biggest, longest package, but this week there was no pre-recorded video package. It was just a live intro from Chuck Todd where he said we're going to get to the real news later, but first, because we have the governor of Kentucky, Governor Baier, as one of our guests, I guess we will hype the deaths from the flooding in Kentucky as a big story. I mean, there were like 25 people dead. There are actually hundreds of people missing, but I mean, like 300 or 400 people are dying every day of COVID in the United States, which really didn't make the news on any of the programs. So I don't know exactly why the flooding is more important. People dying from flooding in Kentucky is more important than COVID, except, well, one thing to Chuck Todd's credit is he ties it in with climate change, which, of course, to people in the future is probably the biggest story that hasn't been covered. And every time they talk about climate change, people in the future are saying, yes, that's what you should have been talking about. If you're looking back 10, 20, 30 years in the future on the news coverage yesterday, you're probably saying, why didn't they talk more about this climate change that's destroying the habitability of our planet? But Chuck Todd does tie that into the Kentucky floods. In the final news summary, I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. We're going to get to all the politics, my interviews with Joe Manchin and Jon Stewart, all of that in just a moment. But we need to begin with this historic flooding in eastern Kentucky. It's the worst flooding there in decades. It's left dozens dead. 4 children from one family are dead. Officials expect the number to rise in the days ahead. As of yesterday, some 1,300 people had been rescued by air or boat. 14 counties have been declared disaster areas, and tens of thousands of homes are either without power, running water, or both. And sadly, more rain is in the forecast. Now, climate experts say global warming has not increased the number of floods, but what it has increased is their severity due to more powerful rainstorms. This is extreme weather in action. I'm joined now by Kentucky's Governor Andy Baier. Governor Baier, sadly, this is not the first time.
So yeah, that's the last of the news summaries. Is that an acceptable news summary from NBC News Meet the Press? I mean, he did tie it into climate change, but he kind of missed all the big stories in the previous 4 news summaries. He said, well, we'll get to all that news later, but shouldn't you start the program with the biggest news of the week? I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. Now I'm going to give you 3 clips of Joe Manchin and 2 clips of Republicans responding to Joe Manchin on this big deal, the big deal on climate change and drug prices and the corporate minimum tax. And the first clip here is from CBS News' Face the Nation, where John Dickerson asks Joe Manchin to respond to something he said back in a debate in 2010 about not raising taxes in a recession. Of course, whether we're in a recession or not, that was also a big story this week. Is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, which, you know, because we're so geared towards capitalism, we can't even talk about contraction, economic contraction. It all has to be phrased in terms of growth. So negative growth, that's not even a real thing. It's economic contraction, but it's really minor economic contraction in the first and second quarters. It's like 1.5% in the first quarter and 0.9% in the second quarter. I mean, if it's a recession, I think the Biden administration should be calling it a soft landing recession, because that's kind of the softest recession you could even think of, like 1% or even 1.5% in the first quarter, 0.9% in the second quarter, while they added like millions of jobs. That's Well, anyway, I'll talk about that more after you see Joe Manchin responding to John Dickerson on CBS News' Face the Nation, showing him what he said back in 2010. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Senator, welcome. I hope you're feeling better from the COVID. Let me start with
John, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let me start with something you said back in 2010 in a debate when you were running for Senate. Here's what you said.
I don't think during a time of recession you mess with any of the taxes or increase any taxes.
So that's become your Republican colleague's favorite quote to roll out now that you've made this agreement with Chuck Schumer that has a tax piece to it. Why'd you change your mind?
John, I didn't change my mind. I've never changed at all. This is fighting inflation. This is all about the absolute horrible position that people are in now because of the inflation cost, whether it be gasoline, whether it be food pricing, whether it be energy pricing. And it's around energy mostly. It's driving these high inflation. This is going to take care of that because this is aggressively producing more energy to get more supply to get the prices down. That's what we're doing. But we didn't raise taxes, John. The taxes were, the corporate tax in America in 2017 before the Republican tax cut was 35%. They cut it to 21%, 14% reduction. All the people that I know are paying 21% or more. All the even larger corporations, but some of the largest corporations of $1 billion of value or more don't even want to pay the minimum of 15%.
So this is an issue of fairness.
It's basically closing. This is a fairness in closing a loophole. Yeah. So I'm not raising any taxes. I never thought that people weren't paying at least 21.
Let me ask you about.
And I don't know why. I mean, we went.
Let me ask you on the raising. Okay, so I understand what you're saying about closing loopholes, but the Republican criticism, which attaches to what you said in 2010, is when you increase taxes by closing loopholes, you hurt supply, and during inflation, you want a lot of supply. And so even though this might not be a tax increase relative to previous rates, the taxes for certain companies will go up, which will make them produce more, so the theory goes, and that will hurt inflation.
Let me just say this, John. In the last 2 years, there have been massive record profits across the board by these largest corporations, massive record profits. And it's been the lowest capital expenditure in the last 2 years. So that didn't drive it. What they've all told me was we want security, we want to have some type of a pathway forward in permitting and regulations. They're strangling us. And this is what we're doing. We're streamlining the regulations that people have to live within. They're basically accelerating how we get things to market, how quick we can produce things, how quick we can basically produce more energy, and how we can develop more technology and using that for our benefit. We're talking about also batteries for electric cars. If you want to get a discount on an electric car by buying an EV, the battery better be made in America. It better be sourced in North America. It better be processed.
So yeah, that's the first Joe Manchin clip trying to defend this deal. I noticed John Dickerson kind of made a mistake there where he said, like, raising taxes on corporations is going to make them produce more, when he meant to say produce less, which, because inflation is like too much demand, not enough supply. If corporations are producing less, that would mean less supply, which could increase inflation. Although what's really important about this bill in terms of inflation is the fact that it decreases the deficit, because that's, the government can put more money into the economy by spending more than they spending more than they take back from the economy in taxes. But this proposed bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, it actually decreases the deficit here. You can see over $300 billion in deficit reduction, which means that the government is taking more money out of the economy than it's putting in, which decreases inflation. That's sort of the idea. That's not the number one cause of inflation, how much the government is spending, really. If it were, then Biden would have decreased inflation because he cut the deficit a huge amount from the Trump spending during the pandemic. But it really has more to do with the Federal Reserve and the interest rates, and of course the whole supply chain issue and the war in Ukraine. They all have like various effects on whether we have inflation. And actually that's what's wrong with this next clip. Here you'll see Bret Baier, the supposedly straight news anchor on Fox News Sunday, asking Joe Manchin about what he said in the past about the American Rescue Plan. And that actually was spending, so it was money added to the economy. More money in the economy, chasing fewer goods means that could be inflationary. But if you like really study what caused inflation, the American Rescue Plan and that spending was a very small part. Actually, the Trump spending in the Trump administration was much larger and had a bigger influence on inflation, but even more than that was low interest rates and supply chain problems, so that manufacturers didn't produce enough goods, so there was too much money chasing too few goods, and that's the real cause of inflation. But that's my big problem with this questioning by Bret Baier. Joe Manchin's, because he's like so conservative of a Democrat, doesn't even push back on the Fox News talking points, and he because he knows his voters in West Virginia are mostly believers in the Fox News talking points. He doesn't even push back on the idea that the American Rescue Plan caused inflation. And I mean, if Bret Baier is going to ask a confrontational question, he should ask something different than what Joe Manchin believes. But anyway, that's my pre-criticism of the clip. I will criticize a little more after we watch it together over here.
So last year you said the American Rescue Plan, the COVID relief bill, would not cause inflation. Take a listen.
You're spending $1.9 trillion, and that you may end up overheating the economy and causing inflation, sir.
Well, I hope we don't. I don't think we will, because, again, I've said we spread it out. We didn't throw it all at one time.
But most experts now believe, Senator, that spending, that bill did spark the skyrocketing inflation. So why should Americans believe you now when you say that this new bill will not exacerbate inflation?
I made sure I don't make that mistake again. That's the bottom line. I make sure I didn't make that mistake again. With that, I tried. I was anticipating that we could help and do more, and everything that you've said here is correct, and I'm not countering that whatsoever. That's why I was extra cautious right now. And for the 8 months that I've endured being against Build Back Better and all the different things that the Democrat colleagues wanted to do, I thought was wrong. Definitely couldn't do any more and stopped all that from happening, Bret. This is a piece of legislation that's an investment. We've taken $3.5 trillion in spending that was aspirational spending that my colleagues wanted to do on the Democrat side, and we've taken that down to a $400 billion investment. We're not sending a check to anybody. You're going to have to basically produce. You're going to have to get out there and put some capital out there, take some risk and produce. Bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, building up a battery manufacturing and resourcing. I don't want to be dependent on foreign supply chains. That's exactly what has been happening. We're changing that. I'm just grateful that everyone's coming together. You know, my Republican friends, I've said this, we've done everything that basically, when you look at this bill, you've always wanted to basically make sure that we're able to reform permitting. We're doing that. You wanted to pay down debt. We're doing that. You wanted more manufacturing. We're doing that. We're doing everything you've asked. And I would hope in a normal time this will be a bipartisan bill, but I understand the toxic atmosphere we're in.
Yeah. But there are some analysis groups, some nonpartisan groups. University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School, says the act would very slightly increase inflation until 2024, then decrease inflation after that. But it says roughly it's indistinguishable from zero, and they don't think it'll have an impact on inflation. So, I mean, that's a group that's looking at this.
Bret, I respectfully disagree on that, but you know what? We can have differences of opinions. We paid down $300 billion of taxes into debt reduction, okay? $300, we've never done that in 25 years. We basically have taken $288 billion in savings that reduced the drug prices for Americans across the board. That hasn't been talked about for years, never done. We've accelerated the permitting process to bring products to market quicker. We've done all of this. And I'm saying, with that, we had 17 Nobel laureates the time before say that, oh, inflation is going to be transitory. So people have difference of opinion, but they have to work hard to find something. They're not given credit for anything as quick as we're going to make changes, bring more products to market, bring more production, increase that. And I think you're going to see people, when they start looking and reading the fine print, there's an awful lot of balance and good here for the American people.
All right, a couple more specifics, and then we'll talk broadly. This bill would give families making $300,000.
So, yeah, there's kind of the Fox News Sunday attempt to cross-examine Joe Manchin, but he won't refute the talking points there that the American Rescue Plan raised inflation, but he tried to, like, make the best case he could. And, I mean, some of the talking points on Fox News have been really bogus about supposedly this raising taxes, and I'll talk about that a little more when I show you the Republicans trying to respond to the Joe Manchin, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden deal. But actually, that clip I showed from Fox News Sunday of their interview with Joe Manchin, that wasn't the clip they played the most today on Fox News, because I watch Fox News a lot more than I should probably, and the clip they kept playing was Joe Manchin won't even say that he wants there to be a Democratic House and Senate. And that's a clip from a question that Chuck Todd asked on Meet the Press, where he actually asked Joe Manchin, can you make the case for Democrats to keep control of the House and the Senate? And Joe Manchin wouldn't even do it. Although, if you listen to this clip very carefully, there's one point where Joe Manchin says, I'd love, and he kind of gets interrupted by Chuck Todd. I mean, Joe Manchin is the chair of a committee when the Democrats control the Senate, and I mean, any senator is going to say, yes, I hope I still stay. I think it's the Senate Energy Committee. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what Joe Manchin's trying to say here, but he's trying to be so nonpartisan, so non-Democrat, so non-Republican that he won't even say that he cares who's in charge of the House or the Senate. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that last Joe Manchin clip together over here.
Friend of mine, I respect her.
What's your case for Democrats to keep control of the House and Senate this election year?
I don't know. If you look back through history, it makes it very difficult, especially in most toxic times we've ever seen. So it's up in the air right now whether the House, it looks like the House.
Do you hope Democrats keep control of the House and Senate?
I think people are sick and tired of politics, Chuck. I really do. I think they're sick and tired of Democrats and Republicans fighting and feuding and holding pieces of legislation hostage because they didn't get what they wanted, or something, or someone might get credit for something. Why don't we start doing something for our country? Why don't we just say, this is good for America? I've always said the best politics is good government. Do something good, Chuck. But I'm not going to predict what's going to happen.
I'm not asking you to predict.
I just want to make sure we do something good. And this is...
What result do you want? Do you want the Democrats to keep control of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives?
Oh, I love... I'm not making those choices or decisions on that. I'm going to work with whatever I have. I've always said that. I think the Democrats have great candidates that are running. They're good people I've worked with, and I have a tremendous amount of respect and friendship with my Republican colleagues. So I can work on either side very easily.
So you don't care the outcome?
I don't have a problem.
You don't care about the outcome this year of the election?
Well, whatever the voters choose. I can't decide what's going to happen in Kansas or California or Texas. I really can't. I've always taken the approach, whoever you send me, that's your representative, and I respect them. And I respect the state for the people they send, and I give it my best to work with them to do the best for my country. I don't play the politics that way. I don't like it that way. That's not who I am.
There was a new third party organized in it.
So actually, it wasn't Chuck Todd interrupting Joe Manchin that stopped him from saying what he loves, but there was that weird, like, I love, and then he said, well, I don't care who's in charge. But I think he might have been saying he loves being the chair of a committee, or who wouldn't love being the chair of a committee in the Senate? That it seems unimaginable that Joe Manchin wouldn't prefer the Democrats being in charge, because he said many times he won't switch to being a Republican. But before I get to, I have two Republicans who I'm now going to show clips from my last two newsmaker clips. But first I wanted to stop briefly and thank a couple more Super Chat contributors. I saw Tom Trask gave me my second Super Chat contribution after Matthew. I thank you for that. And then Lulu Girl showed up for my late show, Better Late Than Never, with the Super Chat contribution. I appreciate the regulars showing up for whenever I seem to schedule the Monday media mix-up. But anyway, I do have a couple Republicans I want to show before I finish my live stream today. And what I want to do is compare Jon Karl's pretty bad cross-examination of Republican Senator from Louisiana Bill Cassidy with Jake Tapper's much better cross-examination of Pennsylvania Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Those are the last two newsmaker clips. And they're both talking about this deal that Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin have made, and presumably Joe Biden was part of it as well. And here you can see Bill Cassidy make a whole bunch of bogus claims about the deal without really getting any pushback from ABC's Jon Karl. He just follows up with his... This is the kind of thing that people criticize Chuck Todd for on NBC News' Meet the Press, that he has a pre-planned series of questions and can't really react to misinformation from his guest and do real cross-examination. But anyway, here's Jon Karl doing a bad job cross-examining Bill Cassidy first in the penultimate newsmaker clip tonight over here.
Senator Cassidy, you heard Senator Manchin lay out his arguments for this new bill on climate and spending. What's your response?
Yeah, much of what he says is just not true. For example, they are raising taxes. According to the Joint Committee of Taxation, the taxes will be raised almost $17 billion in the first year on those who are making less than $200,000. And the percent of taxes raised for individuals increases over time for the middle class and the lower income. They're raising taxes on people who make less than $10,000, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. And in terms of lowering the price of fuel, they're going to raise excise tax on the every barrel of oil by $17 roughly. That is going to increase the price at the pump, increase other fuel-related costs. So much of what they're saying about this bill is not true, and those are two examples.
You and other Republicans have frequently pointed to Larry Summers and what he said about the original version of Build Back Better, saying that it would increase inflation. This bill, though, is significantly less expensive. It is more targeted. And Larry Summers now has an entirely different view, at least on this bill. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, I believe that this is disinflationary policy that's also going to make the economy more efficient, that's also going to preserve the environment, and also is going to make us have a fairer society.
So here's the guy that you and other Republicans pointed to over and over and over again in explaining opposition to Biden's original plan. Now this pared down plan, he says, is going to be disinflationary and lead to a fairer American society. What do you say now to Larry Summers?
Yeah, it may be disinflationary by causing a recession. They're interjecting an incredible amount of uncertainty into the economy just as we entered a recession, number one. Number two, 50% of the taxes on business are on manufacturers. I just spoke to a Louisiana manufacturer last week, and he's just having to increase wages to attract workers. And now we're going to increase his taxes as much as we're going to. Manufacturers can choose to set up in the United States or choose to move to Asia. I think what we're doing is inducing them to move to Asia. You can have a disinflationary program by causing a recession. I think this is going to lead to a worse recession.
Okay, so I'm hearing you're definitely not going to be on board here. This will be all Democrat.
So yeah, that was Jonathan Karl's, like, all he had to cross-examine Bill Cassidy was that Larry Summers clip. Nothing about how the Joint Committee on Taxation, their whole thing is like they're going to, I mean, the only way that there's this whole Republican talking point about how this raises taxes on people making under $400,000 a year. Well, there are only two ways that this raises taxes on those people. One is increased enforcement, which is they put more money into going after people who cheat on their taxes, so they may get more taxes out of people making under $400,000 a year who are cheating on their taxes. And then the other way is there's this weird thing where, like, if you increase tax, Republicans believe if you increase taxes on corporations, they're going to pass on those increased taxes to consumers and lowering wages for workers. And anyway, they like count the anticipated lower wages for workers through the minimum corporate tax. That's like, they call that a tax on workers. It's not a tax at all. It might be lowered wages. It's possible that would lower wages, although not very likely, especially given that Bill Cassidy just said in his answer there that he's hearing from manufacturers that they can't get workers and they have to increase wages. So Jonathan Karl missed that whole cross-examination point as well. But the final newsmaker clip I want to show you... Oh, before I get to the final newsmaker clip, I did also want to thank Clip Culture for the $10 Canadian that Clip Culture contributed to this live stream. I appreciate all of my live viewers who give me the super chat contributions, especially... Often I don't get monetized right away. Like a couple weeks ago, for some unknown reason, YouTube decided to age restrict my live stream. It was like, I think it was because there was something about the Highland Park shooting in there. But anyway, I appreciate all of you who support my channel through financial contributions, because YouTube doesn't give me that much these days anymore. There are also a couple links down right below the video in the video description to directly support my channel on a monthly basis on Patreon or through a one-time contribution on PayPal. So anyway, that's a moment to make that pitch, but I want to finish up the program with a much better cross-examination of a different Republican. This is Pat Toomey being cross-examined by Jake Tapper on a huge amount of bullshit. He doesn't get to all of it, but he does get to most of it in a clip I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
About veterans in a second, but first, you just heard Senator Manchin argue that Republicans should be supporting his climate and tax bill because it would reduce inflation, boost energy production here at home, lower gas prices, increase revenue by closing a loophole, and help pay down the debt. I'm guessing you don't see it that way, but what's your response?
Well, Jake, thanks for having me. Look, I like Joe Manchin very much. He and I have become friends over the years that we've served together in the Senate. But it really looks to me like Joe Manchin's been taken to the cleaners. Look, this bill, the corporate tax increase, is going to slow down growth, probably exacerbate a recession that we're probably already in. The prescription drug price controls are going to slow down the development of the next wave of life-saving and life-enhancing medicines. They're going to take this money and spend it on corporate welfare for green energy, subsidizing wealthy people buying Teslas, and in a blatant political bailout, the Obamacare subsidies that they said they'd let expire this year are going to be continued for high-income Americans. All of this adds up to doing nothing for our deficits. It's going to do nothing for climate change. And what does Joe get for this? He gets the promise that someday in the future they'll pass some kind of legislation about energy infrastructure. If they were serious about doing this, they'd put it in this bill. It's not going in this bill because they don't have Democrat votes for it. And by the way, we haven't seen any text. We don't even know what it looks like. So this is a disaster. This is going to make our recession worse. It's going to make inflation worse. It's not going to do any good. I'm really surprised that Joe agreed to this.
So You just said a lot. Let me do these one at a time.
Yeah.
So first of all, when you talk about corporate tax increase, what this bill would do was that if there is a company that has $1 billion or more in profit, it would require that that corporation, that company, spend at least 15% of its profits in taxes. Now, to the average American who pays more than 15%, they might think that doesn't really sound like raising corporate taxes. That sounds like the way Senator Manchin described it, closing a loophole. Why are they wrong?
So let me say why this is devastating, especially to American manufacturers, especially to the coal industry, why Joint Tax Committee says half of this burden is going to be carried by the manufacturing sector. So here's what happens. If a company makes $1 billion, the income, that $1 billion, is calculated using our tax laws. And then they pay 21% on that. Now, what we did in the 2017 tax reform, which helped spur so much economic growth and investment, is we said if you take your profits and you invest them back in your company, if you buy more equipment, if you buy more machinery, if you build a new plant, if you do the kind of things that allow you to grow and hire more workers, then we'll allow you to treat that as the expense that it is in the year in which you incurred the expense, rather than take that expense in little bits over many years. So someone with that $1 billion in which they reinvest all of it, that doesn't count as income for that year. Now, according to the financial standard, the financial accounting, financial books, which is what Joe and this deal would rely on, they don't allow you to expense that investment you've made in your business. They only allow you to take a small sliver of that as a deduction in the year in which you incurred it. And so you'll have to pay 15% on that investment. Guess what? That makes that investment in American manufacturing much more expensive. It means there will be less of it. We made this change, Jake, very consciously, predicting, correctly as it turned out, that it would accelerate the investment in American manufacturing. The Democrats are going to blow that up.
So you said that this isn't going to do anything for climate change, but at its heart, this bill would be the single biggest investment to combat the climate crisis in U.S. history. It's $369 billion in new tax credits, investments in clean energy manufacturing, efforts to curtail emissions. We are seeing the results of the climate crisis all over the globe, a crisis the Republican Party has been denying the existence of for decades. Climate experts say this bill would have a real impact. Why don't you agree with that?
No, well, not the IPCC, not the. Then in 2100, the end of this century, the surface temperature of the planet would be 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than it would otherwise be.
Yeah.
Given that kind of scale, what is having a few more rich people buying Teslas going to do? It's going to do nothing. What we need is a strong economy and the ability to find the innovation and the technology that will allow us on a massive commercial scale to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But these gestures, they may feel good, they're not going to accomplish anything.
I think it's more than just allowing some rich people to buy Teslas, but I do have this important issue that I know you want to talk about, which is Republicans, led by you, this week blocked the bill.
And then Jake Tapper asked Pat Toomey about the PACT Act, which that's the whole Jon Stewart supported attempt to get veterans health care for toxic burn pit and other exposures paid for over the their lifetimes and everything. But I thought Jake Tapper's cross-examination of Pat Toomey was better than the one from Jon Karl. I mean, he did bring up how this was like a huge investment, the biggest investment ever in mitigating the effects of climate change. Pat Toomey made this bogus argument there about how, well, even if the U.S. went to climate or went to carbon emission zero by 2100, it wouldn't do anything. But actually, last week I showed some clips from Al Gore, but the clips I didn't show, one of the most important things he said was, if the world, not the United States, but if the world went to zero carbon emissions within 5 years, the warming of the planet would stop. If the world goes to zero carbon emissions, which is what our goal should be, within 5 years, the warming of the planet would stop. And something else that Al Gore said, within 25 years, the carbon would start dropping out of the atmosphere and things there would be a lot better. So 5 years it stops, 25 years it gets a lot better. I mean, someone should put out like an informational video on that, like kind of like if you quit smoking and like the first day your cilia come back to life, or the first week this happens, and 6 months later. It's like if the world stops polluting the atmosphere with carbon and gets to zero emissions in the first 5 years, this happens. In the next 25 years, this happens. I think that would actually be a big incentive for people to get to zero carbon emissions. But that could be the most important story. And like I said, Jake Tapper did a better job than Jon Karl, but I don't know if anyone did the greatest job of making the stakes of this climate change mitigation bill really apparent to news viewers. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm going to finish up the program now. I appreciate all my live viewers. I appreciate the recorded show viewers who leave comments that I sometimes have time to respond to. Anyway, I will be back next Monday and every Monday, at least for the next 99 days until the November midterms. Well, I'll at least do a live stream after that, the Tuesday of the November midterm. So that's what, like, still over 100 days, because it's today 99 days till the November midterms. But anyway, I'll be back next Monday and every Monday for at least several months, and then we'll see what happens. And until then, thanks for joining me, and I will be seeing all of you around the internet.